Purpose. The reason for which something is done. If we move on to the next slide, sorry, Paul. The reason for which something is done or for which something exists. That's one of the definitions of purpose. And that's what we're looking at this morning. Purpose. But first, let's think about holidays. The island of Okinawa in Japan was originally called the Island of Immortals. It's an incredible place. Look at that. That's rather blue, that water, if you can't see it on the screen. It's a rather blue ocean. And it's an incredible place, and the more I read about it, the more I want to go. But I've never been, and maybe I never will. But generations of islanders on the island of Okinawa have lived long and healthy lives. That's changing, though, because the culture in Okinawa is becoming westernized. The island is becoming more and more like Western culture, like Britain, like America in particular. But there are enough of the elders on this island left who grew up in the typical Okinawan way that we can actually learn something about why the island was called the Island of Immortals. Why were they living so long? And one of the reasons might be something that they call their ikigai. Ikigai. You can tell I'm fluent in Japanese. It's a Japanese term, and it literally means believing that one's life is worth living. And it's a term used across Japan, but in particular in Okinawa, it's kind of translated a bit more specifically. The reason that you get up in the morning. In a 7-year study of over 43,000 Japanese adults, and that is a big study. Normally these studies are a few thousand, but 43,000 Japanese adults. It was discovered that individuals who believed that their life was worth living were less likely to die in the near future than were their counterparts who didn't believe that. So literally, a sense of purpose kept these Japanese adults alive for longer. That's something worth considering. But now we're going to head east. We're going to head east across the Pacific Ocean from Japan all the way. I think it's about a 22-hour flight involving certain connections. It might be quicker if you pay a bit more money, but you'll end in Central America, in Costa Rica, in a particular place called Nicoya. And we encounter another term that revolves around purpose. So across the globe, across a whole ocean, we find them talking about a plan de vida. And that is again translated as a plan of life or a reason for living. This chap is Don Faustino. Sadly, I don't think he's any longer with us, and you'll understand why. He would get up at 4 a.m. on market day every week to catch a bus, to go into town, and to go shopping. He would do this once a week. He was 102 years old. That was in 2007, when the book that I've been reading about these particular areas was written. And this is him. And there's another photograph. I haven't got it on the slideshow because I couldn't get the easy rights to it. But it shows him on a bus, surrounded by people. This 102-year-old crowded into a hot, sweaty bus, heading down to the market on a Saturday. Why would he do it? Well, he was busy buying ingredients for the exact same Sunday soup that he'd made for the past 40 years. And after church on a Sunday, all his family would come to his house. I think there were 5 generations. When you're 102, 5 generations perhaps of people were coming. And they would gather for dinner, and he would make them the same Sunday soup for the past 40 years. It's the highlight of his week, something he would look forward to. He would meet the same butchers, the same greengrocers, and they would know what he would ask, and they would give him exactly the same ingredients, but he would do it every week. And his 78-year-old daughter said this, spring chicken of a lass. We all look forward to it, though we wouldn't mind a menu change once in a while. That she could make the soup. She was fully capable of making that soup. But Don Faustino wanted to do it. He still felt the need to be needed. At 102, he wanted to provide something for his family. And in a way, that was certainly on a Saturday a reason for him getting up in the morning at 4 a.m. because he knew that he was needed. If he didn't do it, the same thing that had been happening for 40 years would stop happening, and his sense of purpose would have disappeared for that particular activity in his life. A reason for living, a reason for waking up in the morning, however old we are. It's vital to our health and to our happiness. It helps us to keep going, whether we're 2 or 102. And that is just what was going on in our reading from the Bible. It was a reading from the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah was around at a very difficult time in the history of God's people. Because God's people, who had continually been under attack for generations, had faced what was almost annihilation. They were being removed from what they saw as their chosen land, the place that they had come to, that God had led them to. And an outside force, in this case the Babylonians, had come and had taken them away into exile, taken them to a foreign land. And this place was alien to them where they were taken to. It didn't have the same structures as they were used to. It didn't have this incredible temple that they were used to coming to and worshiping God in. All their land was no longer theirs. And they were quite literally beginning to lose that sense of purpose, of why should we get up in the morning to serve these masters? God's deserted us. There is nothing that we can achieve here in the wilderness, they called it, in exile. They'd been taken from their land. And the book of Jeremiah is a long book. You can tell when it says chapter 29. You know there's quite a few chapters before then, and there's a few more after it. And most of Jeremiah, it was written in a way that he got the reputation of being the weeping prophet. He was lamenting. He was in despair. And much of Jeremiah is that. It is a book of hopelessness and despair. But from around this time, from around chapter 29, and this is Jeremiah, and it's a painting by Rembrandt, and it's him lamenting over Jerusalem. He writes all these incredibly sad prophecies about what's happening to God's people. But around chapter 29, things begin to change. He starts to talk about hope. And he starts to tell the people, look, yes, you are stuck in exile. And if you remember what Marjorie was reading to us, he actually tells them, marry. Get used to this place. This is where you're going to be for a while. But it's not where you'll always be. And God begins to unfold a future vision for his people that will give them a sense of purpose for where they are living, that will give them a reason for getting up in the morning. Okay, those of us who might know our Bibles and who might use the internet to know our Bibles, the 2 most searched Bible verses on BibleGateway.com, there's a few sites out there, but I think Bible Gateway is one of the biggest ones. The first, have a guess. God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. That's John 3:16. That's from the New Testament, and that is the most searched Bible verse across all countries, because this website's got different ones in different countries. And even in Australia, strangely enough, they're still searching for that one ahead of all the others. The second most popular across all the countries involved. That's right. Jeremiah 29, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. That was the second most searched for Bible verse in 2014. And I think there were millions and millions of hits across this website, and that was the second most searched for one. It's interesting that you have one about Jesus, and then you have one about the plans of God for his people, right up there. That's what people want to hear. That's what people need to hear, that God's got a plan. And he spoke of his plans to a people who were in desperate need. They thought they were going to be there forever and there was no hope. And Jeremiah said, yeah, get used to it. You're going to be there a long time. And all these other prophets that are saying, don't worry, you're going to go straight back home, they're lying, because you're not. You're going to stick around for a while. But God has a plan for you. God has a future for you. There is a hope beyond what you can see. This was a people who thought they had no reason to get up in the morning other than to serve the people who had taken them from their home. So what about our purpose? Can we say what our reason is for getting up in the morning? I'll tell you what my reason for getting up in the morning is. There's a little girl that jumps on my bed at about 6:30 and says, get up. That is the main reason that I get up at 6:30. I would not get up at 6:30 unless this little large girl would jump on, usually on my side. I can hear her coming in. First you hear the dum-dum-dum of her room, then the door opening, and then the dum-dum-dum, and then my door opening, and then dum-dum-dum-dum-dum. And I'm thinking, it's my side of the bed again. And then I just feel this lump jump on me and hope that it's not elbows and knees in the wrong places. That's my reason. I mean, joking aside, for many people, family is a reason for getting up in the morning. It certainly was for Don Faustino. His family, those he loved, were one of the main reasons that kept him going, I believe, from what I read about this guy. And for some of us, that's how it might be. Our family keeps us going, helps us to get up in the morning when there's no other reason, when it's a dull morning, when it's one of those forest mornings where the clouds just don't seem to be going anywhere and things just aren't working out. Another reason might be a job or a career. We might get up in the morning because we absolutely love what we do for a living. We absolutely love our job or career. Not all the time, but it might be, no, do you know what? Most of the time, I get up in the morning and there are ups, there are downs, but actually, I love what I do. And for some of us, that's how it is. And that's our purpose. The problem with especially the second one is that jobs and careers do not last forever. And if we put all our eggs in one basket, for farmers, or if we focus entirely upon that purpose of that incredible career or job we've got, it may not last forever. Retirement will come if you're fortunate enough to retire, although for me, it just seems to be going further and further away. But I'm not looking for that. That's all right. But for some of us, if we work for retirement, when that hits, people's purpose can disappear overnight, literally overnight. And there can be real issues for people whose entire or most of their focus, their reason for living is what they do with their job or their career. When that goes, it can be very difficult. And there are statistics out there which suggest that people in high-flying careers who suddenly retire come up against all sorts of health problems. And I think some of that is because their reason for getting up in the morning has gone. And they don't know where to turn. I want to tell you about my purpose for getting up in the morning. And the thing is, it's changed. That's the key, it's changed. When I was younger, you just got up in the morning because that's what you did. And when you were really young, you got up really early. And when you got a bit older, sometimes you needed a bit of prodding to get up in the morning. But I remember when I went through university, and maybe some of us still need prodding to get up in the morning. My reason for getting up in the morning at university was partly to see all my friends, partly to play too much pool. That was one of my... on a Friday afternoon, or sometimes on a Friday morning, I'd be playing lots of games of pool. I never got that good at it, but I played a lot of it, so I'm experienced. I'm an experienced bad pool player. But I was also getting up in the morning because I did want to achieve something with that university degree, and that's how I felt at that time in my life, that there was actually purpose to what I was doing. I got married, and some of my purpose for getting up in the morning was this incredible relationship that I was in, and I wanted to look after my wife, and I wanted to explore what it meant to be a husband. And that was part of my purpose at that time in my life. It changed from university. I was now a husband. I became a father, and suddenly my purpose again changed and shifted. And suddenly these two things had come into my life at different points. And your purpose has changed, and your reason for getting up in the morning changes, and you begin to realize, man, I used to be selfish. You don't realize that sometimes until somebody else begins to depend on you. And it doesn't necessarily have to be children. It might be a relative or a friend, and you realize, wow, I can be really selfish. And so my purpose changed. I wasn't so looking at me all the time. I was beginning to, hopefully, I was beginning to think more clearly about others. And that often happens. I trained for ministry. And my purpose was to get through the training and to feel that call of God upon my life and where he would take me. And then I came here. And my purpose here is to see what God has got in store for us as a church. And have you noticed that my purpose has changed from when I was a university student and Friday mornings were pool to now, through that vast change? And if you think about your own lives, there have been stages in your life where your goals have been very clear, but then perhaps other stages where they've shifted. Now that is something that I personally call a secondary purpose. And the reason I call it secondary is because it does change over time, depending on your life stage. And it's really important to recognize that that keeps us going. And if our secondary purpose disappears, we can come into problems. But there's something greater than that, something that's actually been through all those stages of my life and has remained pretty constant, although I might have said it in different ways. I might have felt it in different ways. And that's God's purpose. God's purpose in my life has remained constant. God's purpose was for me to know him through Jesus Christ. Not because God's an egotist, but because God knows that for me to flourish, for me to live a healthy and happy life, for me to be fully human, I need to be in a relationship with my Creator. And I need to be in harmony with his creation. And that's been a constant, even if I've not necessarily felt it as strongly during certain periods of my life. That's been a constant for me. And I believe that's what God wants for each of us in our lives. It's that perfect picture that we can draw and we can hope to achieve of the Garden of Eden, where humankind is at peace with each other, at peace with creation, and walking with God. That's the picture of the Garden of Eden. And I think that was God's plan in the beginning, and I don't think his plan's changed. He still wants us to be at peace with each other. He still wants us to be at peace with creation, and he still wants us to walk with him. So let's shift God's purpose into our purpose. And I've talked to you about those two levels, that secondary level of purpose, which changes through life, but it's really important to recognize that we can have a kind of a purpose that shifts with our life stages. And this one can change depending on our family status, depending on our job, depending on what we do with our time, depending on our passion. But I believe it should still be affected by God's purpose for our life. It's important, but I call it secondary because it changes. And it's important because when it goes wrong or when we lose it, that can really affect us. But it's still only a secondary purpose that shifts sometimes like the wind. I want to encourage all of us to think about that secondary purpose first and foremost, and how God can be involved in your reason for getting up in the morning, in your family situation. Is that an area where God is at work, heavily involved, or is that an area where he isn't? What about our job or what we do with our time for most of the day? Do we bring him into those situations by asking for help, by asking for guidance, by asking for clear purpose? What am I doing today, Father, in this thing that you've given me as a gift? But overriding all of these things And this was brought home to me incredibly forcefully when I was studying for the ministry. I read books and I spoke to people who said, you know what, Rob, you will not always be a minister if God allows you to retire or God allows you other time. And if you put all your focus on being a minister, when it's gone, what are you left with? And that's the same for all of us. If we put all our focus on that secondary purpose of our job, or even that secondary purpose of our family, that can change. And what happens when it does? Overriding all of this should be our primary purpose. And that's what really matters to us. That's what's there or should be there when all the other things change, when our life goes in different directions. That should be our reason for living. And again, I think it's very simple to know our Creator and to be at peace with what He has created. Jesus sums it up, doesn't he? He sums it up by saying, love God and love your neighbor. That's one way of saying, be at peace and love your Creator, and be at peace and be involved in harmony with your creation. Do you know, all of this is, I've got it here. A lot of what I've been saying this morning, especially about these particular areas, is from this book, The Blue Zones. And you'll be glad to know, those of you who've been here for 3 weeks in a row, that this is the final sermon related to this, which talks about areas in the world where people are living long and healthy lives and why they are doing that. And you know, I couldn't put this book down. It's a National Geographic publication, so it's pretty interesting for someone like me, who almost ended up being a geography teacher. God, can you imagine that? The world is a safer place, I think, because of that. But it teaches me about how we should value old age, how we should aim to thrive at any age, but particularly as we get older. How our fast-paced, choice-rich, because we live in a society where we have many choices, and those choices aren't good for us. Sometimes it's best we don't have those choices. How our society is not necessarily geared towards human flourishing, no matter how many car adverts tell you that you will flourish. But God's way is. And I actually found in this book that there are echoes of the Bible in his conclusions. I don't think this man is a religious man, but there are echoes of what I've read in the Bible there. For instance, the book says, put family first. And the Bible says, honor your father and mother. The book says, downshift, take it easy, find a day of rest. And the Bible tells us that Jesus is the person to go to whose yoke is easy and whose burden is light. And the Bible tells us that Sabbath was made for us to enrich our lives. Don't give up worshiping together, the Bible tells us. And this guy here says, participate in a faith community. It's incredible. It's like he's read the Bible. He also says, craft a personal mission statement, which I think is his way of saying, know your purpose in life. And the Bible says, I know the plans I have for you. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. When a 21st century book tells you how to live a happy and healthy life, if it is anywhere near delivering on its promise, if it can get anywhere near to delivering that to its readers, then I think of course it's going to sound like the promises in the Bible. It should come as no surprise to us that the words of the Bible are sometimes ringing loud and clear through books that seem to have no connection with it, because we've been there before. Because God already has a plan, and it's far greater than this guy's 9-step strategy to a healthy and happy life. God has a plan for human flourishing, and he wants you to be part of it. So this morning, I simply want us to think very clearly about that. Our secondary purpose, we can go away, we can think about our life stages and how that might change, but the key really is this, and this is what sums up all of what I've been saying in the previous weeks. God has a plan for human flourishing. His plan is that we know him through Jesus Christ. And I just want to ask all of us, where are we on that plan? Let's pray.